Carol Beck slouched in her chair, staring blankly as yet another jingle bell-infested melody echoed from the overhead speaker. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "One more Christmas tune and I'm going to snap." With a sigh, she rose, shut her office door with more force than necessary, and tuned the radio to a classic rock station. Guitars replaced sleigh bells. That was better. She turned up the volume, flopped back down, and stared at her open spreadsheet, its cold glow filling the room. A knock broke the silence. "Yeah, come in," she called, not looking up. Jake Callahan stepped inside, eyebrows raised playfully. "Am I walking into a war zone?" She smirked. "Only if you brought mistletoe." He laughed and let the door click shut behind him. "Grab a seat," she said. "What's up?" Jake sat down. "Just wondering if you're actually going to show up at the company holiday bash this year or avoiding it again." Carol let out a long breath. "Still undecided. You know how I feel about Christmas." "Yeah, you and the holidays have issues," he said. "I've also got a pile of reports that's threatening to crush me," she added. "You've got a team. Delegate," he said, shrugging. She gave him a sideways glance. "You're not wrong." "I rarely am," he said with a grin. "I delegate to you. You pass it on. It's the circle of corporate life." Carol rolled her eyes. "How about you shut up and have lunch with me instead?" "Tempting offer. The usual spot?" "Of course." "I'll grab us a table. 20 minutes good?" She nodded. "I'll wrap up and meet you." 25 minutes later, Carol pushed through the door of the diner. Jake was already seated, waving her over. "I ordered your usual," he said as she slid into the booth. "Pastrami on rye?" "You know it." "Thanks," she said as the waitress placed their drinks down. Jake watched her take a sip. "All right, sis," he said, his tone shifting. "Something's going on, spill." She set her glass down slowly, giving him a cautious look. "What makes you say that?" "You're off. It's not just your yearly holiday funk. Is this about the tech guy?" Her jaw tightened. "Don't call him that." "You're right, sorry," Jake said quickly. "But seriously, he works on computers. You run the company's finances. It's a mismatch." Carol leaned back. "Ray isn't just some guy who fixes printers. He's a senior network engineer, global infrastructure, multi-million-dollar projects." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but let's be honest. You probably earn triple what he does." "Close enough," she admitted. "And that doesn't bother you?" She shrugged. "Not really." Jake leaned in. "You're the one stuck juggling work and home while he's off flying around the world." "Exactly," she said. "But Ray's good to us. He's kind to Timmy. He's a present father, even if he's not physically here all the time." Jake frowned. "A great dad who's barely home. That's a tough sell." She gave him a weary look. "You know, when your wife passed, I showed up for you. You don't have to fix this for me. Just listen." Jake nodded. "I hear you. But something else is weighing on you, isn't it?" Carol hesitated, then set her sandwich down and stared at the table for a long moment. "Christmas Eve will mark 15 years since Mom passed," she said quietly. "Heart failure. She worked herself into the ground trying to hold us together." Jake's expression softened. "I didn't know it was Christmas Eve." "And Dad?" she added. "He died Christmas Day. Plane crash. He was flying home to surprise us." "I was 9. Jake leaned back, stunned. "That explains a lot. Every time Ray boards a flight, I panic," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'm terrified I'll burn out like Mom did, give everything and end up alone." Jake hesitated, then asked gently, "Do you think Ray's being unfaithful?" She looked up sharply. "No, that's not him. He may be absent, but he's loyal. I know that much." Jake reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. "Just know I'm here, Carol. For you and for Timmy. Always." Her eyes softened. "Thanks, Jake. That means more than you know." "Anytime," he said with a quiet smile. They finished their meal in silence. Carol checked her watch and groaned. "Damn. I've got to get back before they assume I fled the country." Jake chuckled. "You're the CFO. Pretty sure you're allowed a lunch break." "Even so," she said, standing. "There's work to do. Hopefully the team didn't burn the place down while I was out. Thanks again for everything." "You know where to find me," he said. "Anytime." She nodded, grateful, and walked out. Jake watched her go, his thoughts turning. Ray doesn't deserve her, he thought. Maybe, just maybe, this is my shot. A quiet grin crept across his face. Outside, Carol paused by her car. Across the street, a man in worn clothes held out a sign, asking for spare change. People walked past him like he was invisible. Why can't people just work hard like Mom did? She wondered bitterly, shaking her head as she climbed into her car and drove off. Back at the office, Carol checked in with her team and reviewed the latest reports. Pleased with their progress, she gathered her files and returned to her office. The second she sat down, syrupy Christmas music blasted from the ceiling speaker. She groaned and picked up the phone. "Can someone from IT come kill this music?" she asked. A young technician showed up moments later, lugging a small ladder. He climbed up and twisted the speaker knob until the sound clicked off. Silence, Carol thought. Finally. "Thank you," she said with a sigh of relief. "You're welcome," the tech replied with a polite smile. "And Merry Christmas?" Carol forced a tight smile. "Same to you," she said flatly as he left. Why can't people treat December 25th like any other day, she thought. Why not say Happy April 17th instead? She closed the door and returned to work. Hours flew by. By the time she looked up again, her co-workers were bundling up to leave. "Night, Carol," one called as they waved. "Good night," she said, forcing a smile. It was 5 p.m., and she had no intention of clocking out yet. Too much to do. Once everyone was gone, she picked up the phone and dialed Ray's parents. "Hello?" Alice answered cheerfully. "Hi, Mom," Carol said warmly. She'd called her in-laws Mom and Dad for years. "Well, hello, Carol," Alice replied. "Still stuck at the office?" "I'm afraid so. Year-end chaos," Carol said with a weary laugh. "Oh, I remember those days," Alice chuckled. "How's my boy doing?" "He's being a little angel," Alice said fondly. "Right now, he's in the den with George, but he misses his daddy." "I know," Carol said softly. "So do I. I'll get him for you." A moment later, Timmy's sweet voice came through. "Hi, Mommy." "Hi, sweetheart," Carol said, her face softening. "Are you having fun with Grandma and Grandpa?" "Oh, yes, Grandpa's reading me a story." "That sounds great. How was school today?" "It was okay," Timmy replied. "I did my homework and Grandma checked it." "Good job, honey. I'm proud of you," she said. "Do you miss Daddy?" "Yeah. Do you think he'll call me tonight?" "I think he will," she said. "I'm hoping so." "Will he be home for Christmas?" "I believe so. You know how much Daddy loves spending Christmas with you." "I love spending it with him, too," Timmy said sweetly. "Okay, Mommy. I'll let you go. I love you." "I love you too, baby," Carol said, blinking away tears. "Give Grandma and Grandpa a kiss from me, okay?" "I will. Bye." The phone rustled as Alice came back on. "Are you working late again?" "Yeah," Carol said. "Every night this week, honestly. I've got to finish everything before the party on the 23rd. If Ray doesn't make it back early, could you keep Timmy a little longer? I hate to ask." "Say no more," Alice said warmly. "We love having him." "Thank you, Mom. I really mean it." "Not a problem. He looks just like Ray, you know. George can't stop smiling when he's here." "Thanks again," Carol said softly. She hung up, staring at the screen for a moment, gratitude mixed with guilt. Her in-laws were so generous, but she hated not being able to balance work and motherhood better. If only Ray were home, she thought. At 7:20, her phone buzzed again. Ray's name lit up the screen. "Hey, honey," she said. "How's Seattle?" "Insane," Ray said with a tired laugh. "I just took a break. Tried calling the house, got the machine. Figured you were still at the office?" "Yep, still buried in year-end stuff." "Timmy's at my parents'?" "He is. He misses you like crazy." "I miss him too," Ray said quietly. Carol hesitated, then spoke. "I miss you, Ray. How much longer is this going to go on?" Ray sighed. "Carol, we've been through this. I don't know. Hopefully not much longer. But it's part of the job." "I know," she said, her voice low. "But I'm tired. I don't know how much more I can take. Join the club." "Will you be home for Christmas?" she asked. Ray chuckled gently. "What's this? You growing fond of Christmas all of a sudden?" "I just want you home," she said. "Timmy needs you. You know how much he looks forward to this." "I know," he said. "And I'm doing everything I can to wrap up the job and come home. I want to be there too." "Are you working late again tonight?" 16-hour days, Ray said. "It's brutal." "I understand," Carol said quietly. "Just promise me you'll call Timmy tonight. He really misses you." "I will," Ray replied. "And Carol?" "Yeah?" "I love you." "I love you too," she said. They ended the call with soft goodbyes and gentle promises. But when Carol turned back to her screen, the exhaustion finally caught up. She shut everything down, pulled on her coat, and headed for the exit. "Good night, Mrs. Beck," said the night guard. "Good night, Charlie," Carol replied, grateful he hadn't said Merry Christmas. Most of the staff knew by now not to. Driving home, she passed rows of glowing houses, lights twinkling, trees in the windows. Her house was the only one on the block, dark and undecorated. Ray usually did the lights. When he did, it looked like something off a postcard. He said it was for Timmy, but Carol knew it was for him too. Ray loved Christmas, so did Timmy. But Ray had been gone for 6 weeks, coming home only on weekends. Last weekend, not even that. A site emergency kept him in Seattle. At least he called every night. But calls weren't enough anymore. She pulled into the garage and shut the door. Inside, the house felt hollow. She disarmed the alarm, dropped her purse on the table, and walked into the quiet kitchen. On the table, a note from Alice. "Lasagna's in the oven. Still warm." Carol smiled. Alice reminded her so much of her own mother. Gentle, thoughtful, caring. She sorted through the mail. Bills, junk, a stack of Christmas cards, all from Ray's side. Her own family didn't send any. Didn't exist anymore. No siblings, no cousins, no aunts or uncles. Just her. Ray's family had become hers. She envied his closeness with them. The lasagna was still warm. She served herself a slice, poured a glass of wine, and ate in front of the TV. Afterward, she cleaned up, locked the doors, and headed upstairs. On the way, she paused by an old framed photo. She was about 7, smiling between her parents. A tear slid down her cheek. "If there's any justice in this world," she whispered, "they'd still be here. Just a little justice. Is that too much to ask?" Upstairs in her bedroom, Carol slipped into her robe and sat on the edge of the bed. She grabbed Ray's pillow and hugged it tightly against her chest. "Why can't you be here with me?" she whispered. "Don't you realize how much I need you right now?" The pillow, of course, had no answers. She placed it gently on his side of the bed and exhaled slowly. Jake's words echoed in her mind. "Ray's a good man, but he's never around anymore." And he wasn't. Last week it was Miami, the week before Kansas City. Now Seattle. What next? And for how long? Carol had always out-earned Ray, and until recently that had never bothered either of them. But tonight, with Jake's voice stirring doubt, it felt different. She thought of the women she knew, some in her own building, who had left husbands too focused on work, absent, while their wives managed everything else. Carol wasn't baking cookies waiting for her husband to come home. She was the breadwinner, the engine that kept things running. And Jake had a point. She had once encouraged Ray to aim higher, to chase promotions, but he always said, "It doesn't work like that in my field." "When will it happen then?" she had once asked. "I don't know," Ray had said. "Guys like me can stay in the same role for years. You have to adapt constantly or get left behind." Carol sighed. "Well, if something doesn't change soon, it will, and fast. I'm tired of being the one left behind. Tired of telling Timmy his dad's gone again." She thought of other women's stories, affairs they kept secret. "If no one knows, no one gets hurt," they'd said. Her thoughts drifted to Jake, his steady hands, confident eyes, and quiet presence. She imagined slipping into his bed, giving herself to someone other than Ray. It would be easy. With Timmy at his grandparents' and Ray hundreds of miles away, no one would know. Downstairs, she made tea and sat in the front room, robe wrapped tightly around her. This was the first time she had seriously considered cheating. Would she? Could she? If Ray ever found out, would he leave her, or would he understand? They'd never talked about infidelity. It had always been assumed, faithfulness, no exceptions. But now, she wasn't so sure how either of them would respond. She told herself not to act on impulse, not yet, not before Christmas. When the laundry finished, she moved it to the dryer and headed back upstairs. Crawling into bed, she stared at the ceiling, unsure how much longer she could keep doing this. The next 2 days blurred together. Wake up, shower, dress, coffee, work late, crash into bed. She checked in with Timmy each evening, called Ray's parents, and briefly spoke to Ray. On Wednesday, she went to George and Alice's house for dinner. Timmy had lit up when he saw her. At work, she kept her distance from Jake. He invited her to lunch both days, and both times she politely declined, citing deadlines. That Wednesday night, just after she walked in the door, the phone rang. Ray's voice came through. "Are you really home?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "I just got back from dinner at your parents'." Timmy was so happy to see me. "They told me," Ray said. "So, does that mean you're finally done with the end of year reports?" Pretty much, she replied. Just a few formatting things left. How are things on your end? She asked. Actually going really well, he said. We'll be flipping the switch tomorrow afternoon. If all goes smoothly, we'll wrap everything up by tomorrow night. So, when are you flying home? The earliest I could book was 2 p.m. on the 24th, Ray said. 2-hour layover in Denver, so I probably won't land until late. But you'll be home for Christmas? I promise, he said. Then, in a John Wayne voice, added, God willing and the creek don't rise. Carol laughed. Well, you better be, cowboy. There's a little boy here who misses you, and so do I. I miss you guys too, Ray said. More than you know. I love you, Ray, she whispered. I love you too, he replied. He hesitated, then asked, You going to the company party tomorrow? Yes, she said. They expect me to stay the whole time. You planning on spending the night? Maybe, she said. Depends how I feel. Just be careful. I'd hate for something to happen to you. They hung up a few minutes later. Carol stared at the ceiling again, torn. She loved Ray, but she couldn't deny it anymore. Part of her still wanted Jake. The next morning, Carol wrapped up her reports by noon and handed them to Jake. Outstanding work, as always, Jake said, flipping through the pages. The board will be impressed. Thanks, Carol said. You should take a breather. Send your team home early. And I assume you're coming to the party. I'll be there, she replied. Will your husband be joining? He's still in Seattle, not flying in until tomorrow. Jake nodded, then handed her a small envelope. I booked you a hotel room, just in case. I'd hate for you to end up with a DUI. You can check in this afternoon. It wasn't unusual. Senior staff often stayed through the night after the party and executive meeting. Thanks for thinking of me, she said. I booked the penthouse again, Jake added with a smirk. Hot tub, great view. Maybe after the meeting you and I can unwind. Bring your swimsuit, unless you prefer not to. Carol arched an eyebrow. Are you trying to seduce me, Mr. Callahan? Jake grinned. Would I? She shook her head, laughing. You're impossible. So I've heard, he said. See you tonight. See you then. After grabbing the room key, Carol left the office, dismissed her team, and went home to get ready. She had her hair and nails done, packed a small overnight bag, and tossed in a bikini she'd barely worn all summer. She added a pair of pajamas she rarely used, slipped into jeans and a sweater, picked up her dry-cleaned dress and heels, and loaded everything into her car. At the hotel downtown, she walked through the lobby, arms full. Just as she reached the front desk, a voice called out behind her. Excuse me, miss. You dropped your keys, a man said. Carol turned to see a stranger, tall, clean-cut, and striking. His eyes caught her off guard, bright blue with golden flecks near the pupils that almost shimmered. He handed her the keys. Here you go. Thank you, she said as their hands touched. A small jolt ran through her fingers. Sorry, static shock, he said, smiling. Must be, she murmured, blinking. Thanks again. Merry Christmas, he added. Yeah, you too, she replied, dazed. Carol checked into the hotel and took the elevator to the 5th floor. After laying out her things, she soaked in the tub, careful not to wet her hair. But the warm water could not quiet her thoughts. Tonight, she might cross a line she hadn't even approached in over 12 years of marriage. If Ray were here, she thought bitterly, none of this would even be on my mind. But he's not, and Jake is. She caught her reflection in the mirror and froze. Just for a moment, she thought she saw her mother's face looking back at her. Then it was gone. What the hell? She whispered. Splashing cold water on her face, she pulled herself together, reapplied her makeup, and headed downstairs. It was showtime. The ballroom was already alive with chatter and music. The first person she spotted was Philip Carson, chairman of the board. And Mrs. Beck, you look stunning tonight, he said with a warm smile. Thank you, Mr. Carson, Carol replied. You remember my wife, Camille? He asked, gesturing beside him. Of course. Carol offered a handshake. It's nice to see you again, Mrs. Carson. Call me Camille, the woman said kindly. Where's your husband tonight? Still in Seattle? Carol explained. He's flying in tomorrow, weather permitting. Philip nodded. They're predicting storms in Denver. Hopefully he avoids the worst of it. Fingers crossed, Carol said. I also had the chance to review your year-end report, Philip added. Excellent work. Thank you, I appreciate that, Carol said. It was good seeing you again, he said. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Beck. Merry Christmas, she replied, raising her glass before slipping into the crowd. She made her rounds, greeting co-workers and their guests. Eventually, she found herself face to face with Jake. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Well, well," Jake said, grinning. "You look incredible tonight." "Why, thank you," she said with a small bow. "And you're looking sharp yourself." "I clean up okay," he said. "After dinner, care to join me for a dance?" "Maybe," she replied playfully. "But first, we should probably eat." "They're already getting started," Jake said, guiding her toward her table. Carol sat with colleagues from her department, while Jake took his place at the head table beside the Carsons and other board members. After a few minutes, Jake stood and tapped his glass. "Good evening, everyone," he said. "Welcome to Callahan and Son's annual holiday party. Philip asked me to keep this short so we can all get to the filet mignon, so I'll do my best." Laughter filled the room. "Thanks to the report by our CFO, Mrs. Carol Beck," Jake continued, "I'm happy to announce that your bonuses are safe." More applause and cheers followed. "This year was tough for the company and the economy," he said, growing serious. "But we've pulled through thanks to your hard work, commitment, and resilience. On behalf of the board and shareholders, thank you. Merry Christmas. Enjoy the night." He gave a nod to Philip, who gave him a thumbs up, earning more laughs. Dinner was smooth and relaxed. People asked about Ray's absence, and Carol answered graciously. Afterward, guests began drifting to the dance floor. Jake approached again. "Nice speech," Carol said. "Thanks, little lady," he said with a smirk. "Since we're both flying solo tonight, care to dance?" "Absolutely," he said. They moved together across the floor, close, but not too close. People knew they were friends and neither wanted to stoke gossip. Still, as the night wore on, they kept finding each other again and again. Their connection grew more noticeable with every slow song. "You're beautiful tonight," Jake whispered. Carol looked up at him, tempted to suggest they go somewhere private, when pain shot through her head. She gasped and crumpled, grabbing at her skull. The music stopped. Jake dropped beside her. "Carol," he said, supporting her head gently. "She's burning up." "Should we call emergency?" Philip asked, stepping closer. "No," Carol whispered, her voice weak. "Just help me to my room. I need to lie down." "She's been overworked," Jake said. "She just needs rest." An employee brought water and Tylenol. Jake helped her sip slowly and handed her the pills. "Let us take her, Mr. Callahan," said Jenny, a colleague. Jake stepped back reluctantly as Jenny and Connie helped Carol up and walked her to the elevator. He watched until the doors closed. 30 minutes later, the women returned. "She's asleep," Connie said. "Fever's down. She just needed to crash." "Good," Jake replied, visibly relieved. "Thanks. I'll check on her in the morning." In her room, Carol stirred, disoriented. She sat up, realizing someone had changed her into pajamas. Then it came back. Jenny and Connie had helped her, tucked her in. The clock read 12:30 a.m. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and sat still. That's when she noticed a strange glow at the foot of the bed. She looked up and gasped. Her parents stood before her, glowing versions of the people she'd loved as a child. "Mom? Dad?" she breathed. "Is it really you?" "Yes, Pumpkin," her father said softly, using the nickname she hadn't heard in decades. Tears welled in her eyes. "How is this possible? You're dead. I must be dreaming." Her mother smiled gently. "It's not a dream, it's complicated. But we're here." "One day you'll understand," her father added. "But why now?" Carol asked, trembling. "What do you want from me?" "We want you to be happy," her mother said, "and to stop yourself before you make the same mistake I did." "What mistake?" Carol asked, frowning. Her mother looked at her husband, then back at Carol. "The one that cost your father his life. The same mistake you're about to make, with Jake Callahan." Carol flinched. "You know? We're dead, not blind," her father said, half smiling. Her mother's voice softened. "Be honest. You want his attention. That's why this is happening." "That's not true," Carol snapped. "You don't understand." "I understand better than you think," her father said gently. "How old were you when I died?" 9, she answered. "Same as Timmy is now," her mother said quietly. The words hit hard. Carol's eyes widened. "Oh my God! Do you remember where you were that Christmas?" her mother asked. "With Grandma and Grandpa," she said. "Did you ever wonder why I wasn't there?" "You were working," Carol said slowly. "That's what Grandma told me." Her mother lowered her eyes. "No, I was with someone else, a man I shouldn't have been with." "You cheated?" Carol whispered, stunned. Her mother gave a slow, solemn nod. Yes. Your grandmother, God bless her, called your father and begged him to come home. He caught the first flight he could. He never made it. Carol's voice cracked. Oh my God. I was angry, just like you, her mother said. I didn't see how hard your father was trying. I was selfish. I only focused on what I felt I was missing. Sound familiar? Her father added gently, his tone unmistakably parental. Carol looked down. Too familiar, she whispered. Turning to her father, she asked, You forgave her? There's no bitterness where we are, he replied. She was forgiven. That's what matters. So, this is a spiritual intervention? You could call it that, her mother said with a soft smile. Well, you've got my attention now, Carol said. I swear I won't go down that road. I love Ray and Timmy. We know, her father said. But love doesn't erase pain, and you're carrying more than one kind. Carol lowered her gaze. Yeah? I am. What happens next? She asked. You'll be visited by 3 beings, her mother explained. Carol sighed. Seriously? Ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future? Both smiled. No, pumpkin, her father said. This isn't Dickens, but it's close. The first arrives at 2, the next at 3, and the last at 4, her mother added. They'll show you what your choices lead to. Carol frowned. Why all this for me? You asked for justice, her father said. We can't come back, but we can help you avoid our mistakes. For your sake, for Ray's, and for Timmy's. Timmy? Carol said, surprised. Of course, her mother replied. Everything you do touches him. Carol's throat tightened. I never thought about it that way. Our time's almost up, her father said gently. But we're always with you. Can I hug you? Carol asked, her voice trembling. Please, I've missed you so much. We've missed you too, her mother said. But we can't touch you. Just know we love you. Always. I love you, she whispered. And we love you, Pumpkin, her father said with a warm smile. In a blink, they were gone. Carol reached for the space they'd occupied, but it was empty. Shaken, she slid beneath the covers and glanced at the clock. 1 a.m. Just a dream, she told herself. It had to be. But what if it wasn't? She closed her eyes. Wake up, wake up! Carol jolted upright. A voice had sliced through her sleep like a bell. She blinked at the clock. 2 a.m. Oh no, she muttered. At the foot of her bed stood a man with glowing eyes and a familiar face. Rise and shine, he said brightly. Time's ticking. We've got things to see. Who are you? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Not the ghost of Christmas past, if that's what you're thinking, he said with a grin. Friends call me Cam. You can too. Now let's go. Move it. Can I at least use the bathroom? If you must, be quick, he said, rolling his eyes. You people always gotta go first thing. Carol shot him a dry glare and shut the bathroom door. When she came out, she paused, recognition dawning. I know you, she said. You're the guy from the lobby. You gave me my keys. Bingo, Cam said with a wink. Now take my hand. We're going down memory lane. He mimed, typing into the air, and in a flash the room dissolved. They stood in a modest living room. A little girl played a clunky upright piano while her parents watched from the couch, smiling. A small black cat sat on the bench beside her, its tail twitching. When she finished, her father clapped and pulled her into a hug. That was beautiful, Pumpkin. You're getting so good. Thank you, Daddy, the girl beamed. Carol stood to the side, brushing away a tear. You remember this? Cam asked quietly. She nodded. Yeah, I was 8. My parents bought that piano from a church. It was falling apart, but I didn't care. I loved playing. My dad always made me feel like I was on a grand stage. Cam glanced at the cat. Your little sidekick approves. Twix, Carol said, smiling softly. I almost forgot her. You named your cat after Candy? Carol laughed. It fit. We lost her 6 months after Dad died. She darted into the street when I opened the front door. A car hit her. She died in my arms. Her voice cracked. She looked away. Please don't make me watch that again. I won't, Cam said gently. Is that why Timmy's never had a pet? Yes, Carol said. He's too tender-hearted. I couldn't bear to see him go through that. Cam murmured. And the music? I stopped after Dad passed, she said. I couldn't bring myself to play. Maybe it's time to start again, Cam offered. I'm too old. You're breathing, right? Then you're not too old. If it matters, you'll make time. She sighed. Music doesn't pay the bills. Right, he said, but neither did your mom's second job, yet she still did it. The scene changed. Her mother now sat at a kitchen table, head in her hands, surrounded by unpaid bills. A teenage Carol sat beside her, watching quietly. I'll get a job, young Carol said. I can help. No, sweetheart, her mom replied. Your job is to study. I want you to have a better life. I'm 16. Please let me help, Carol pleaded. Her mother softened. Just do more around the house. I'm thinking of picking up weekend shifts at the nursery. You already work 10-hour days, Carol said. I'm worried about you. I know, her mother said gently, but Mr. Harper offered good pay. We'll be all right. I'll help at home, young Carol promised. That would mean a lot, her mom replied, hugging her tightly. Back in the present, Carol wiped tears from her face. She died 5 years later, didn't she? Cam asked. Carol nodded. Thanks for not making me relive that part. She gave everything she had, she said softly. Worked herself to end literally. Even after doctors warned her, she wouldn't slow down. She just kept going. She passed her strength on to you, Cam said. I've lived to make her proud, Carol replied. I owe her everything. You've had your share of pain, Cam said. But not everything was sorrow, was it? Carol's face softened as the scene before them shimmered into something new. I met Ray during my senior year of college, Carol said. He was this funny, kind, supportive guy. I fell for him fast. I just wish my parents had met him. They would have loved him. They absolutely would have, Cam said gently. What about your wedding? The scene shifted. Ray carried her into a hotel suite, her laughter echoing in the hallway. That was a good day, she whispered, smiling. And then Timmy came along, Cam said as the setting changed to a hospital room. Ray stood beside her, beaming at their newborn. I'll never forget that moment, Carol said softly. Ray was incredible then. He still is. Cam smiled. My wife and I are expecting twins. Congratulations, she said, brightening. Thanks, he replied. So what happened after college? He asked as the imagery moved again. Ray landed a job with Apex as a network engineer. I started in accounting at Callahan and Son. Back then, Ray earned more than me, and things were good. Over time, he got promoted and began traveling more. We didn't love it, but we made it work. She watched the memories play, Ray packing suitcases, waving goodbye, calling late at night. After Timmy was born, the travel slowed, but eventually the assignments picked up again. He was gone 1 or 2 weeks a month. Meanwhile, I moved up. I worked more with Jake, but at first it was strictly professional. And later? Cam asked. Carol nodded slowly. Jake's wife died 8 years ago. That's when he began opening up to me. We talked a lot. Vented mostly, but nothing happened. The scene shifted again. A year later, his father retired, and Jake became CEO. I was acting CFO, and he made it official soon after. We've worked closely since. When did he start wanting more? Cam asked. Maybe 2 years after his wife passed, she said. We started having lunch, talking more. He'd ask about Ray, say how lonely he was, how hard it was to meet someone. Then the subtle jabs at Ray started, calling him that computer guy or a nerd. I always defended Ray, but Jake never stopped pushing. She sighed. I knew what he wanted, but I thought I could manage it. He's my boss, after all. But it started affecting your marriage, Cam said, nodding toward the flickering memories around them. Carol's voice dropped. Yes, Ray and I argued more. About everything. His schedule, money, even dumb things. And that's when I started imagining what life with Jake might be like. Cam nodded. I've seen the timeline. You never crossed the line until tonight. I didn't go through with it, she whispered. No, but if I hadn't stepped in, you would have, Cam said as the scene shifted to the ballroom. Her eyes widened. Wait, you caused the migraine? Guilty, he said with a soft smile. Had to act fast. You saved me from a huge mistake, she admitted. He nodded. Maybe this time. But what about next time? What happens when Ray's gone again and the loneliness creeps back in? Carol paled. I wouldn't. You already almost did, Cam said firmly. Jake's been playing the long game. This wasn't spontaneous. He's been working on you for years. Oh, God, she whispered, looking away. We're out of time, Cam said gently. Think about what really matters. Talk to someone, maybe a counselor. Maybe you're right, she murmured. Come on, he said. Let's go. In a blink, she was back in her hotel room. Cam was gone. The clock read 1:55 a.m. She lay back down trying to settle, but unease stirred as the air shifted. Shadows gathered and took form. A tall man in worn Western clothes, a battered Stetson, and a long duster. She sat up. "Who are you?" He tipped his hat. "Name's Mir. Judge O'Mear. Folks call me Eli. You're Carol Beck, right?" "Yes," she said cautiously. "Well then," he said, his Texas drawl smooth. "Best get up. We've got ground to cover." She stood, unsure, as he pulled a rope from nowhere and looped it gently around her. "What is that for?" she asked. "Just making sure you don't drift off," he said. "Things might get bumpy." "Where are we going?" "This way and that. I heard you're not too fond of Christmas." She gave a small laugh. "It's not my favorite. Ma and Pa used to say they felt sorry they had no shoes until they met a man with no feet. Know what I mean?" "I think I do," she said. He smiled and gave the rope a tug. "Hang tight, little lady." A flash of brilliant light burst around them. When it cleared, Carol stood on sun-baked soil beside a small adobe house beneath a wide Texas sky. "Where are we?" she asked. "Just outside Hard Rock, Texas. Christmas Day, 1854. 1854? She repeated, stunned. "Yep," Eli said. "Hear that?" Carol tilted her head. From inside the house, voices sang Silent Night, raw but heartfelt. "Yes," she said softly. "I hear it. We weren't church folk, but we always sang together. My brothers and I competed for who could sing loudest." Carol smiled, wiping a tear as the door opened and several men stepped outside. In the distance, riders approached on horseback. "Who are they?" she asked. "Native Americans?" Eli nodded. "Sure are. Back then we called them Indians. But they were neighbors, not enemies. Pa made a deal with their tribe when we settled here. We shared what we had." The riders dismounted, greeted warmly by the family. "That's my dad up front," Eli said proudly. Carol watched, eyes narrowing as one younger man burst into laughter at something said by a tall native man. "That was you, wasn't it?" "Sure it was," he grinned. "The one beside me's Windrunner. Fastest guy I ever saw." "What was so funny?" Eli chuckled. "Old joke. He'd see a big woman in town and say, 'I want to marry her.' When folks asked why, he'd say, 'Big, strong woman, good for pulling a plow.' Told it every time. Still cracked me up." Carol laughed. "So, what happens next?" As the men walked toward the corral, Carol asked quietly, "What are they doing?" "That winter was hard," Justice replied. "Pa gave them a few extra cattle to help them make it through." She watched as one of the riders handed something to his father. "What's that?" "A pipe," Justice said with a fond smile. "Handmade, smoked real smooth." The men returned to the house just as two women stepped out. "There's my mother and my wife Lizzie," he said proudly, "coming to call us in for supper." The adobe house glowed warmly against the dusky sky, voices drifting on the cold wind. "So why bring me here?" Carol asked. "To remind you what matters," he said. "Christmas isn't about decorations or shopping. It's about life, family, love. My PA understood that. He didn't preach it. He lived it." "But you said he wasn't religious," she said. "He wasn't," Justice nodded. "Didn't go to church much. Got angry with God sometimes, but he respected people, gave without expecting anything. That kind of heart doesn't come from tradition. It comes from choice." Carol nodded slowly. "I see that." Justice's voice softened. "We'd better go. I'm not usually allowed to do this, and you've still got more to witness." He gave the rope a gentle tug, and suddenly they stood in a bar, Jake's usual hangout. Carol glanced down at her pajamas and flushed. "And they can't see you," Justice assured her. "Just listen." From a nearby table, laughter echoed. 6 men sat drinking. Jake was among them, talking with Alan Michaels. "So," Alan smirked, "still trying to thaw out the Ice Queen?" Carol's face burned. She'd heard the nickname before, but never to her face. "Be respectful," Jake replied. "Carol's a good woman." "Oh, come on," Alan scoffed. "You've been chasing her for years." "Think tonight's the night?" "Maybe," Jake shrugged. "You never know." "Her husband's still out of town?" "Yeah," Jake said with a smug grin. "That nerd's stuck in Seattle." "Well, there you go. Wife's alone, probably crying happy tears. Want something to help break the ice? I've got stuff that works." Jake chuckled. "No thanks. Save it for your dates." The group laughed. Carol's stomach turned. Bill Fredericks, the company's attorney, leaned in. "Are you seriously trying to hook up with Carol? People are noticing." Jake shrugged. "It's not just about that. I want something real. I'm done with flings. When I want something, I go for it, no matter how long it takes." Bill gave him a sharp look. Careful. If her husband finds out, he could come after you and the company. And if you two get together, she can't stay on as CFO. You'd have to replace her. You sure you want to lose the best CFO we've ever had? He added. Jake leaned back. Point taken. Thanks for ruining the fantasy. More laughter followed. Carol turned to Justice, her voice sharp. Get me out of here. He nodded. The bar vanished. They were now inside the penthouse suite, Jake's. Carol's breath caught. On the bed, shirtless, lay Jake, with Brenda Spencer from marketing curled up next to him, one hand across his chest. Her makeup was smeared and she looked content. Carol turned away, nauseous. I've seen enough. Not yet, Justice said gently. One more tug, and they were inside a modest hotel room. Ray lay fully dressed on the bed, asleep. Carol looked around. Small, plain but tidy. On the dresser sat a digital photo frame she'd gifted him. It cycled through photos of her and Timmy, laughing, hugging, smiling. Justice spoke quietly. He wanted those faces to be the first thing he sees in the morning and the last before he sleeps. Carol dropped to her knees, sobbing. How could I be so blind? I nearly destroyed the man who loves me, for someone who sees me as a game. Justice knelt beside her. It happens. You're human. She wiped her eyes. He helped her up. Come on, your final guide is waiting. They returned to her hotel room. Carol collapsed onto the bed, tears falling freely. A flash of light lit the room, and a petite blonde woman with piercing eyes appeared before her. Who are you? Carol asked. Adrestia Ramnusha, the woman replied calmly. You can call me Dr. A. Are you an actual doctor? Carol asked skeptically. I hold multiple doctorates, Dr. A said with a polite smile. Now please come with me. Carol took her hand. The room faded, replaced by a sleek corridor lined with glowing portals. What is this place? Carol asked. The Hall of Opportunity, Dr. A explained. Each portal shows a possible future. These are paths you might follow if nothing changes. So, they're not guaranteed? Carol asked. No, Dr. A said. Just possibilities. Step into the alcove, hold the rail, and observe. You won't be seen or heard. Step back when you're ready to leave the vision. Got it, Carol said with a nod. Dr. A gestured. Start with the first portal. Carol entered the alcove, gripping the rail. The vision unfolded instantly. Her and Ray locked in an argument. How could you do this to us? Ray shouted, his face red with hurt. It just happened, Carol said, her voice shaky. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You weren't here and… Ray cut her off. You think I don't miss you? You think I like being gone for work while you're here alone? I miss you and Timmy every day. Carol looked away. You call every night, but you're never actually here. Ray shook his head, his anger giving way to pain. No, Carol, this wasn't an accident. She stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying Jake's been after you for years. Since his wife died, he's had his sights set on you. You think I didn't notice? You think I'm blind? He hesitated, then his voice dropped. You were with him at the company Christmas party, weren't you, while I was stuck in Seattle? No, she said quickly. I had a migraine. I went to bed early. You expect me to believe that? Please, Ray, I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, he said coldly. You hurt Timmy. Did you even think about him while Jake was working you? I did, she stammered. I don't want your excuses. His tone was final. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going after custody. Her eyes widened. No, you can't, please. Can't we fix this? There's nothing left to fix. You've been tearing me down for months, mocking my job, my time away, and now this. I hope it was worth it. He grabbed a suitcase. I'll be gone for a while. When I get back, I expect you to be out. He walked out. Carol crumbled to the floor, sobbing. The vision faded. Carol stumbled out of the portal, shaking. No, please, no. Actions have consequences, Adrestia said calmly. Step into the next alcove. Carol moved forward. She now sat in a booth across from Jake in a diner. So, did the nerd file yet? Jake asked with a smirk. He did, Carol replied flatly. He wants custody, alimony, and support. Seriously, what a joke, Jake laughed. My attorney says he'll probably get them. I make more, and Ray's mom can testify that she kept Timmy when he traveled. Jake shrugged. Move in with me, beats motel life. You can bring Timmy when it's your weekend. Carol looked uncertain. Maybe. Most of my stuff's still in storage. I'll need help moving. Of course. Listen, I know you're going through a lot. But I love you, Carol, and I know you feel it too. Maybe after the divorce you'll think about marrying me? She hesitated. That's fast. The papers aren't even signed, but yes, I have feelings for you. I wouldn't have slept with you otherwise. Let's get through the divorce first. Jake smiled. I've waited this long. I can wait a little longer. The scene ended. Carol backed away, dizzy. Adrestia gestured. Next. She stood outside Ray's front door. Alice opened it. What do you want, Carol? I'm here for Timmy. It's my visitation day. Alice's face was firm. He doesn't want to see you. I want to hear that from him. Fine, Alice said, stepping aside. Inside, Timmy sat on the couch, expression blank. Hey, sweetie, ready to come with me? He turned slowly. I'm not going anywhere with you. Carol froze. Timmy, it's me, Mommy. You hurt Dad, he said, voice trembling. I hate you. I don't ever want to see you again. Please don't say that. I mean it, he shouted. You're not my mom anymore. Get out. He ran upstairs and slammed the door. Carol tried to follow, but Alice blocked her. You heard him, Alice said. Leave him alone. You turned him against me, you witch, Carol screamed. Alice stayed composed. I'll ignore that once. But Timmy makes his own choices. He doesn't want to see you. Defeated, Carol walked out. She collapsed in her car, sobbing into the steering wheel. What have I done? Carol stepped back from the vision, her tears falling freely. How accurate are these? She asked. If you continue down this road, Adrestia replied, they're over 99% certain. She pointed to the next alcove. This summarizes your next few years. Carol entered, a courtroom. The judge addressed the room. After reviewing the case, I grant the plaintiff's petition for divorce. Raymond Beck retains full custody of the minor child Timothy. Visitation rights go to the defendant. Carol's stomach sank. The defendant will pay 20% of net income in child support and $5,000 monthly in alimony for up to 5 years. She will also pay half the mortgage during that time. Marital assets will be split, 60% to the plaintiff. Wedding rings must be returned. The defendant will revert to her maiden name. The gavel struck. Carol walked out silently, numb. Next, she stood in a small chapel. Dressed in white, she exchanged vows with Jake. They honeymooned in Hawaii for 2 weeks. Back at work, Carol entered her office. Philip Carson was waiting. Good morning, Mrs. Callahan, he greeted. Congratulations. Thank you, she said, smiling. His tone changed. Unfortunately, we have to let you go. Her face dropped. Why? Company policy. Spouses can't both serve on the executive team. We're offering you a generous severance package, and I'll personally write you a glowing letter of recommendation. Right. Thanks, she said, stunned. Jake entered. What's going on? I'm delivering Carol's separation papers, Philip said. You know the rules. Jake frowned. We need her. We'll replace her. Besides, we have bigger problems. There's a morale lawsuit and several clients are upset. The board's meeting tomorrow. Jake, you're suspended until further notice. He walked out, leaving Jake and Carol in silence. The scene shifted again. Carol stood outside a modest house. Jake had lost the estate after being fired. He couldn't find a new job and turned to drinking. Carol struggled to keep them afloat, taking on small jobs. Her luxury car was long gone. Support payments drained her. Ray refused to adjust them. Timmy still refused contact. Every letter returned unopened, stamped refused by addressee. All this, Carol thought bitterly, unlocking the door, because I fell for the wrong man. Inside, voices echoed from the bedroom. Her heart sank. She opened the door and saw Jake, in bed with a young woman, maybe 22. They looked up in surprise, but seeing Carol unmoving, went back to what they were doing. Without a word, she turned, walked into the bathroom, spat in the sink, and returned. Get out of my house, you filthy hooker, she shouted. The girl bolted from the bed, scrambling for her clothes before fleeing. You son of a witch, Carol yelled at Jake. I gave up everything, my marriage, my family for you. And this is how you repay me? Carol, don't, just don't, she snapped. You've wrecked my life. You won't work, won't help. But you've got time to screw around? I want you out, now! She yanked open his closet, tossed his clothes on the floor, and hurled his toiletries from the bathroom. He scrambled to collect them, but she stopped him. Leave it, just go. A few hours later, he stuffed his things into the car and drove off. Carol collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, hating herself for ever trusting him. The vision shifted. A newspaper clipping announced Ray's marriage to Catherine Hollingsworth. The photo showed them glowing with happiness. But what crushed Carol was seeing 16-year-old Timmy standing proudly beside his father as best man. She watched from the back of the chapel unnoticed. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Timmy stepped forward, hugged Catherine, and whispered, "Welcome to the family, Mom." Carol fled in tears, returning to her tiny apartment. She curled into bed, sobbing into her pillow, her thoughts dark and spiraling. She stumbled from the portal, shaking. Adrestia caught her. "Is this almost over?" Carol asked, voice breaking. "One last script," Adrestia said gently. "It's the hardest." Carol swallowed hard. "Worse than that," Adrestia nodded. "But I'll be right beside you." They walked to the final portal. Adrestia took Carol's hand. "This is 20 years from now," she explained. "Accuracy? About 85%, assuming nothing changes." A cold wind greeted them as they stepped through. A digital sign read, 2:15 a.m., December 25th. Empty streets, icy air. A single homeless woman pushed a squeaky cart through the desolate downtown. "You brought me here for this?" Carol asked, confused. Adrestia's voice was soft. "Dickens once wrote, 'This is the night for the well-fed to gather, and the starving wretch to lie down and die.'" Carol said nothing, eyes fixed on the woman, who sat against a building, cradling frostbitten hands and mumbling to no one. "She's dying," Adrestia said. Carol whispered, "From what?" "Everything. Cancer, malnutrition, mental illness, but mostly loneliness and grief." Carol's voice trembled. "Where's her family?" "She lost them 20 years ago." Carol looked again and her breath caught. The woman's face, aged, dirty, barely recognizable, was hers. Without thinking, she ran forward. The woman had collapsed. In her hand was a locket, faded photos of Carol, Ray, and young Timmy. "No," Carol gasped. "That can't be me. Please, Dr. A. Don't let this be real." Adrestia knelt beside her. "That's why we're here, so you can change it." Carol sobbed uncontrollably. "Please, I don't want this life. I don't want to end up alone and forgotten." "Then choose differently," Adrestia said. She helped Carol up and led her out of the portal. Outside, Carol collapsed to the floor, still shaking. "Will this really happen?" "Only if you let it," Adrestia said. "You still have time." She poured tea from a small table and handed her the cup. Carol sipped slowly, her hands trembling. "Can I really turn things around?" she asked. "You can," Adrestia replied. "But it starts now." Carol nodded, wiping her face. "I will. I'll do better. I'll be the wife and mother they deserve." "I hope so," Adrestia said with a soft smile. "Now it's time to go back." In an instant, Carol was back in her hotel room. She sank onto the bed, overwhelmed but determined. Things are going to change, she thought. She fell asleep almost immediately. By morning, light streamed through the curtains. It was just before 8 a.m. She rose, made coffee, and remembered an ad she'd seen online days earlier. She pulled out her phone, found the ad, and sent a quick message. Moments later, a reply buzzed in. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. She was brushing her hair, getting ready to leave, when a knock came at the door. She peeked through the peephole. It was Jake. Carol took a steady breath and opened the door. "Morning," he said with a smile. "Mind if I come in?" "Morning, Jake," she said calmly. "Sure. I was just finishing packing." He stepped in. "You look better. You had us worried last night." "I feel better," she said sincerely. "Want to grab breakfast?" "Actually, I'm heading home. I've got a lot to do before Ray gets back." "Oh," Jake said, visibly disappointed. After a pause, he asked, "Can we talk for a minute? There's something I need to say." Carol stopped packing and looked at him. "Go ahead." He hesitated. "I've always been drawn to you. I was hoping we could spend more time together. See where it might lead." She gestured to the chair. "Sit down, Jake. We need to talk." Jake sat in the chair beside her desk. Her tone was calm but firm. Carol remained on the bed, facing him. "I won't lie. I've been tempted. Last night, I almost gave in, but I realized it would have been the worst mistake of my life." Jake opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. "Let me finish." He nodded. "We've worked together for years. You've been a friend and mentor, but I'm married to the man I love. I made a vow, and I plan to keep it." She paused. "And I have a son who'd be crushed if our family fell apart. I won't do that to him." Jake's voice was low. "So the better man wins." Carol shook her head. "There was never a contest. Ray won my heart a long time ago." She gave him a dry smile. Besides, you didn't waste time finding comfort elsewhere. You and Brenda Spencer, how long has that been going on? His eyes widened. How did you? You wouldn't believe me if I told you. It was just last night, he said quickly. We had a few drinks after the party. It happened. I hope it works out, she said. But you should be careful. Company policy doesn't exactly encourage office flings. Yeah, he muttered. Tell me about it. She stood. Since you're here, I'll give you a heads up. I'm resigning January 3rd. Jake sat forward. You're leaving Callahan and Son? Yes, it's time I focus on what really matters. You're one of the top-paid CFOs in the region. Are you sure? I'm sure, she said. There's more to life than titles and paychecks. Jake studied her. What's gotten into you? She smiled softly. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. He sighed. Then good luck, Carol. I mean that. Can we at least part as friends? As long as that's all it is. I understand, he said. I don't like it, but I understand. He hesitated. Can I get a goodbye hug? She held out her hand. Let's keep it professional. Warm handshake? Jake chuckled weakly and took her hand. Fair enough. As he walked to the door, she called out, Jake? He turned. Yeah? Merry Christmas, he smiled. Merry Christmas to you too, friend. Carol exhaled deeply. A weight lifted. She packed, checked out of the hotel, and walked to her car. Across the lot, she spotted a young couple beside a car with its hood up. The woman was crying, holding a baby. Normally, Carol would have kept walking, but not today. She walked over. Hi, everything okay? The man looked up. No, ma'am, our car broke down. We were headed to Wichita Falls to see my dad before, well, he's dying. We spent the last of our money on gas, and now the belt's shot. Carol didn't hesitate. Let me make a call. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Mike's towing an auto, came a familiar voice. Hi, Mike. It's Carol Beck. I've got a family here with a busted belt, headed to Wichita Falls. Can you help? What's the car? Carol turned. What model? 86 Celebrity 2.8-liter V6. The man replied. Carol relayed the info. Yeah, I've got that belt. Give me 45 minutes, Mike said. Perfect. Put it on my tab and top off whatever's needed. You got it. She hung up and turned to the couple. Help's on the way. It's covered. She glanced at the baby, who shivered in the cold. Come inside. Let's get you something warm. Are you sure? The woman asked, hesitant. No question. Let's go. Inside, Carol guided them to a table near the window. A waiter approached. Are they guests? I stayed last night, Carol said. Callahan party. You're not turning away a family on Christmas Eve, are you? He shrugged. We've got a breakfast special. Denver omelet, hash browns, toast, bacon, juice, coffee. Sound good? 2 of those. Something soft for the baby. It's on me. She handed him her card. Then she slipped 2 crisp $50 bills into the man's hand. You'll get there now. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You just did. Take care of your family and maybe someday pay it forward. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. God bless you. Carol smiled, remembering what Justice had shown her. He already has. Merry Christmas, the woman said. Merry Christmas, Carol replied. She stepped outside, emotions bubbling. Across the lot, she saw them, Justice, Cam, and Dr. A, watching, smiling. Cam gave a thumbs up. She smiled back. But when she looked again, they were gone. Back in her neighborhood, Carol felt like a different woman. Alice's car was in the driveway. Her in-laws had brought Timmy home. As she walked in, Timmy ran into her arms. Mommy. She held him close. Hi, sweetheart. Alice and George smiled nearby. Thanks for watching him, she said. Our pleasure, Alice replied, eyeing her curiously. You look different. I feel different, Carol said with a warm smile. She looked around. No decorations, no lights. Turning to Timmy, she asked, Do you know where Daddy keeps the Christmas stuff? Timmy blinked. Yeah, I think so. Want to help put it up? His face lit up. Really? Yes. Dad, she said to George, would you help him with the tree and lights? I'd be honored, he said, his voice cracking. Timmy, she asked, which Christmas CD does Daddy like best? He pulled out a Mannheim Steamroller album. This one? Can we play it? Carol nodded. Of course, it's Christmas, isn't it? Yay! Timmy shouted, already dancing. Carol slid the disc into the player, and soft music filled the room. George and Alice exchanged surprised glances. Alice asked gently, Are you sure you're all right, dear? Carol smiled. I'm great, Mom. Timmy, go help Grandpa with the lights, okay? I will, Mommy, he said, tugging George's hand. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ray. Got an earlier flight. Leaving Seattle in 30. See you soon. Love you. She smiled and replied, That's great. Love you too. Carol turned to Alice. Ray's on his way. Want to help me make cookies and cocoa? I've been slacking in the kitchen. Alice's eyes sparkled. Of course. What's gotten into you? You're glowing. Carol laughed. Let's bake first. I'll explain later. Ray pulled into the driveway just before dusk. He blinked at the house, now covered in lights. Carol had always refused to decorate. In the yard, George and Timmy stood proudly with a few neighbors admiring their work. Timmy sprinted toward the car. Daddy! He yelled, leaping into Ray's arms. Ray hugged him tightly, then looked around, stunned. What is all this? Carol's going to lose it, George chuckled. Whose idea do you think it was? You're kidding, Ray said. Just then, Carol burst through the front door and ran to him. You're home. I missed you so much. I missed you too, he said, still dazed. What's going on? Lights? Music? You hated Christmas. Carol grinned. That was the old me. Meet the new and improved Carol Beck. Ray studied her face. She looked the same, but something in her had shifted. Carol turned to the group. Cookies and hot chocolate inside, everyone. Come on in. Inside, Ray watched Alice and Carol pass out cookies in steaming mugs. You made all this? Ray asked. Your mom helped, Carol said, offering him a warm cookie. He took a bite and smiled. Wow, this is amazing. Timmy settled at his feet. So good, right, Daddy? Carol stepped into the center of the room. Everyone, quick announcement. I have an interview Monday. I'm leaving Callahan & Son in January. Ray blinked. You're quitting? Why? I just realized it's time for a change. We'll talk later. Ray smiled. Then I've got news too. The Seattle job finished early and under budget. My boss was so happy, he promoted me. Starting January 3rd, I'll manage the local ops center. Carol gasped. No more travel? Are you serious? Dead serious. Think you can stand me being home every day? She threw her arms around him. I'd love that. George clapped Ray on the back. Proud of you, son. Later, as guests left, Alice confirmed they'd see the family for Christmas the next day. After Timmy was tucked in and read to, Carol and Ray lay in bed together. He held her close. So, are you going to tell me what happened? Carol nodded. I almost threw everything away last night. I came this close, she held up her fingers, to ruining everything. Ray stared at her. Nothing happened, she said. But it nearly did. And I'm so sorry. Jake? Yes, but I had let's say, a spiritual wake-up call. I saw what would have happened if I'd gone down that road. I resigned this morning. Ray raised an eyebrow. That explains the weird text he sent me. What did it say? Ray pulled out his phone and showed her. The best man won. Congrats. JC. Carol laughed. I thought he was being sarcastic. Want me to go kick his A? No need, she smirked. Life will do that for us. So, what's this new job? A nonprofit, helping homeless families rebuild their lives? Ray looked surprised. You, working with the homeless? I've changed, Ray. I've been selfish for too long. Today I helped a stranded couple on their way to see the man's dying father. I paid for their car repairs, got them breakfast. It felt right. He looked at her with pride. I'm proud of you. I want to be the kind of wife and mother you both deserve. I'm sorry for everything, Ray. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. I love you, and I always will. Ray kissed her forehead. I love you too, and I forgive you. She hesitated. There's more. I saw things, visions. I met 3 guides, Cam, Justice, and Dr. A. They showed me where my life was headed. Ray listened quietly. Sounds like quite a journey, he said when she finished. Maybe I'll meet them someday. Maybe, she smiled. The next morning they opened gifts, then spent the day with George and Alice. Carol was glowing, lighter than she'd been in years. After dinner, they returned home around 5. On the porch sat a basket. Ray walked over and pulled back the red blanket. Inside, a puppy lifted its paw and wagged its tail. Timmy squealed. A puppy! There was a card. Ray read it aloud. Merry Christmas. Cam P.S. He's fixed and vaccinated. Ray smiled knowingly. Cam, can I keep him, Mommy? Timmy begged. Please, I'll take care of him, I promise. Will you feed him? Walk him? Yes, he can sleep in my room. Carol smiled. Every boy needs a dog. Yes, you can keep him. Best mom ever, Timmy shouted, hugging her. Inside, Carol made hot chocolate while the family curled up on the couch. "Ray," she said, pointing to a corner. "Would a piano look good there?" He raised a brow. "Planning to take lessons?" "I used to play. I want to learn again. Maybe by next Christmas I can play Silent Night for us." "I'd like that," Ray said. "A lot." As the movie A Christmas Carol played on TV, Timmy turned to them and said with a smile, "God bless us, Mommy. All of us." Carol looked into his eyes and, just for a moment, saw her father's face smiling back at her. It vanished with a wink. Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled Timmy into her arms. "God bless us, my precious boy," she whispered.